I guess I give life to something that both Dennis and Lorna said, and that is, start learning a language when you're young. Because I didn't start learning Chinese until I was long retired from my work. I began studying Chinese at the young age of 76. My experience with well, before that, I had studied many languages. I studied Latin and Greek. I studied French, studied German, but those are mostly academic courses in languages that I learned. And at that time, uh, there was not a lot of emphasis on actually speaking it. The textbooks were recitations and interviews and simple stories, not really pragmatic. We took it, I think, as Dennis said, or even Lorna, you took it because you need to have a language to graduate or to get a degree or to get a diploma, not as practical as it could be. Uh, I think studying languages is very important because it's a way of understanding the world, of broadening vocabulary, broadening communication with other cultures. My first experience with a living language, as it were, came in 1966 when I was in Baghdad at an American school teaching Iraqi students. And we taught our classes in English. Many of them had gone to prep schools where they learned English, and English was almost a second language in Baghdad, in Iraq. So we taught them in English, but then outside of class, they're all speaking Arabic. The staff at the residence where we lived were all Iraqi and spoke very little English. And I felt it was very important to become immersed in the culture by learning simple phrases. So you learn how to say hello, how to say thank you, how to say goodbye. May I please have something? And my experience was that people were, when you spoke their language, they just beamed. They were so appreciative of the fact that somebody was willing to venture into their culture. As part of my job, I did have a tutor and would have classes for 3 hours every morning. So I became not fluent in the beginning, but as Lorna sort of said, conversant. I could carry on a conversation with people. I go into stores. I could get on the bus and ask, where the bus was going and how much it cost, and get around. And that was again very, very helpful. I did have an experience that has really stuck with me for so many years. While I was in Baghdad, the 1967 Arab-Israeli War broke out. And all of the diplomatic corps of the embassy left the country because it was a very hostile environment. But the administrators of our school said, we're not affiliated with the government. We're going to stay here and continue to do our work, which is what we did. Many of the people in the or England or other countries, but not the United States. But one day, a group of teachers from the school, young teachers who were volunteers, we were going on a trip down to a local site of ruins of an old temple. And the only way to get there was to go across the Tigris River in a large rowboat that was oared by an old man. And in the back of the boat, there were 3 Iraqi soldiers. And we were sitting up towards the front of the boat. And I could hear the soldiers. Well, the old man said to me, where are you from? And we said, well, we're teaching at Al-Hikmah University just up the road. And he said, well, where are you from? Where were you born? And I said, America. Well, the soldiers, their faces went white and they started talking amongst themselves. And they said, they're spies. And I understood enough Arabic at that time to say, no, we're not spies. We're teachers. And they were very mistrustful. And the old man who was rowing the boat said, if your government and our government want to fight and have a war, that's up to them. But the people, we can be friends. And I've really held on to that all these years, is that, it's through person-to-person relationship that you get to know people in a country and can build relationships. And so I've always tried to do that. I did become fairly fluent in Arabic. And then through circumstances, the government regime changed in Baghdad. And the government took over our university and we were expelled from the country. So I just got to the point of really being conversant when we got thrown out of the country, and I haven't been back for a while. But I've always loved languages, and Chinese has always been, in my mind, a pinnacle of languages and the most inscrutable languages. And I'd see the characters, and I'd say, how do people read this? I mean, this is, very difficult to understand. And when I retired, I was taking a course at the University of Mass in Boston called A Tale of Two Cities. And it was taught by a Chinese professor, and it was a comparison between Xi'an, which is the cradle of Chinese civilization, and Boston, which he considered to be the cradle of American philosophy, education, industry, so many different cultural and political values. And it was a very interesting course. And at one point I said to him, I've always wanted to understand Chinese and to learn it. And he said, well, there's a Confucius Institute right across the hall. And so I had no idea what the Confucius Institute was. So I went over there and I literally knocked on the door, and I walked into the small room, and there was a group of people there, and they said, why are you here? And I said, I want to learn Chinese. And we talked very briefly, and they said, when would you like to start? Yeah, there's the staff of the Confucius Institute at UMass Boston, and some of the teachers and the director. But they welcomed me right in, and we began scheduling it right away. No questions asked. But they're also very eager to get me involved in the Chinese culture. And after my second lesson, maybe my third lesson, my Chinese teacher said, we're going to have the Spring Festival, and we're going to put on demonstrations, and would you like to help? I said, sure, I'm always game to, pass out flyers or whatever it might be. And she said, no, you'll teach people to make Chinese knots. And I said, what's a Chinese knot? I had no idea what she was talking about. She said, I'll show you and you will learn. With 2 weeks practice, She taught me how to make Chinese knots, and at the spring festival that they were putting on, we were teaching students and other people to come to make Chinese knots, and it was one of the more exciting displays that they had at the fair, other than the Chinese food, which was served at the end. But my Chinese teacher was so enthusiastic. She said in March, she said, "Oh, there is an essay, competition. You need to write something about your Chinese experience in learning Chinese." And it was the people-to-people essay competition. And I said, "I've only been doing this for 2 months. I can't do a whole lot." She said, "You can do something." And she was so enthusiastic that he couldn't say no. So I wrote an essay and handed it in, and off it went. And we were told June 1st was going to be the deadline when they would announce the honorees. And June 1st came and passed, and no word came out. So I said, I did my part. I gave it my best. And then about 3 weeks later, I was traveling, and she calls me on the phone and says, "Guess what? Guess what? Guess what?" I said, "What?" She said, "You are an honoree." Well, I was floored. I was absolutely flabbergasted, at that. But it was a great honor and experience. And we knew we were going to be going to the gala come September. But I continued to study, and in October and November, I did take the HSK1 and HSK2 tests and successfully passed those. I did try to immerse myself a little bit in Chinese culture at local the Autumn Festival at in Quincy, Massachusetts, which is a town right next to Boston. They had a huge fair of Asian cultures and cuisine, and they had this artist who was teaching people how to paint. And so I sat at the table, and he said, put a dog here and put a dog there, which I did. And then he made the connections, and all of a sudden, these little dogs became squirrels eating cherries in a tree. But it was a whole lot of fun. We then went down to Washington in September for the gala, where I got to meet Sadie and Dennis's daughter, Carmen. It was a very moving experience. Shortly after, about 2-3 weeks after the gala, I got an email from Cheyenne Boyce, who is no longer with the Institute. It was sort of indicating there may be the possibility of a trip to China. Would you be interested? Well, who wouldn't be? So, we went to China, to Chengdu, in Beijing in December. Part of the trip was visiting an international high school, language school for Chinese students. And we had a great time to be there. And I can remember talking with these students, and they were very shy about their language skills. And I said, well, to even begin to make the sounds and to say little simple words. And then I started to use a few phrases in Chinese that I could muster up. And they thought that was pretty funny. So we both began to experience the beginnings of language learning, and the fact that you can only learn it by getting out there and opening your mouth in whatever circumstances you have. And then it culminated in Beijing, standing on the Great Wall of China in December. It was cold, but it was just a very, humbling experience. And I said, 11 months ago, I couldn't say hello. And here I was, through the Confucius Institute, now standing on the Great Wall of China. I mean, it was a year of years that I will never, ever have again. So that was the whirlwind introduction into Chinese language and culture. Um, Unfortunately, the Confucius Institute at UMass Boston, uh, got swept up under the controversy, the political controversies that were raging around the country, and it was time to renew the contract for another 5 years. But the university and the Confucius Institute weren't able to reach an agreement, and the program that had been there for more than 16 years was ended. So I was, floundering around a little bit, but then found out that there was a Confucius Institute at Tufts University in nearby Somerville and Medford. And so I signed up for a course there that was an intermediate course, but it was the best thing they had. So I went, and the only other student in the class was a young Chinese woman who spoke fluent Chinese. And I said, "Why are you here?" And she spoke fluent Mandarin. Her parents taught Mandarin, spoke only Mandarin in the house, but she couldn't read it. And so she was really there to learn how to read the characters. Of course, I'm trying to read the characters too, but at a very different level. But it also just pointed out to me the sort of the complexity of the Chinese language, that people could hear it and speak it, but not be able to read it or write it. And I'd met other young people at meetup groups that I would go to, who were native Chinese. I said, "Well, why are you here?" He said, "Well, my parents speak Cantonese, but my grandparents speak Mandarin, and I can't understand them. So I need to understand how to speak uh, Mandarin to communicate." So I learned, some of the complexities of the language. Uh, as the pandemic came along, though, uh, things got more complex, and the teachers at the Confucius Institute in Tufts went back to China before this was actually before the pandemic, and the new ones had not arrived. So in much of 2020, I've been struggling to keep up with various tools and various apps that I've had to learn Chinese, CDs that I have from textbooks, and looking now at what are the issues that people have in learning and maintaining their Mandarin, their Chinese. And I'm a firm believer in the use it or lose it. If you aren't using your language in an active manner, then it's possible you will lose the active ability to communicate. So I can read a Latin text, or I can read, a French newspaper. I can speak the language as readily or hear it as readily. So the issue is how do we continue to learn and improve our Chinese? What tools and resources can the Confucius Institute provide? What tools and resources can this community of alumni from the people-to-people honorees provide to each other to improve and maintain their language skills? These are the questions that I would leave. What are the resources that local CIs or the CIUS Center can make available? What resources can we make available to each other? Can we build a community of information sharing that would, sustain, our language skills and our cultural interests?